The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Windsor Castle as Prince William sat at his mahogany desk, his hands trembling slightly as he held the fountain pen his father had given him years ago. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like the ancient stones of the castle walls themselves. Kate lay in the hospital bed just miles away, her condition deteriorating with each passing hour despite the best medical care money could buy. William had spent the entire night pacing the corridors of the private wing, watching doctors and nurses move with practiced urgency while feeling completely helpless. The woman who had been his anchor through every storm, his partner in reshaping the monarchy for a new generation, was slipping away from him. The irony wasn't lost on him that despite all his royal privilege, all the resources at his disposal, he couldn't save the person who mattered most. The letter he was writing wasn't meant for public consumption or royal archives. It was deeply personal, filled with memories that only Kate would understand. He wrote about their first meeting at university, how she had laughed at his terrible jokes and never once treated him differently because of his title. He recalled their secret dates in quiet pubs where they could pretend to be just another young couple in love. Every word was chosen carefully, not for diplomacy or protocol, but for truth. As he sealed the letter in a simple white envelope, William felt a presence behind him. Queen Camilla stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She had been a constant fixture at the palace since becoming queen consort, and her influence over King Charles had only grown stronger over the years. There was something in her eyes that made William uncomfortable, a calculating look that he had noticed more frequently since Kate's illness began. Camilla moved into the room with practiced grace, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She noticed the letter immediately, her gaze settling on it with an intensity that made William protective of his private thoughts. The relationship between Camilla and Kate had always been complex, polite on the surface, but filled with subtle tensions that the media often speculated about, but never fully understood. The two women represented different eras of the monarchy. Kate embodied the modern, relatable royal that the public adored, while Camilla carried the weight of history and controversy from her past. Though they maintained cordial relations in public, those close to the family knew that Camilla sometimes felt overshadowed by Kate's natural popularity and genuine connection with the British people. William explained that he needed to get the letter to Kate urgently. The doctors had been vague about her prognosis, but their worried expressions told him everything he needed to know. This might be his last chance to tell her everything he had never found the right moment to say. Camilla listened with apparent sympathy, offering to personally ensure the letter reached Kate immediately. Her offer seemed genuine, even motherly in its concern. She spoke about understanding the importance of final words, referencing her own experiences with loss and the regrets that came from things left unsaid. William, exhausted from his vigil and desperate to help Kate in any way possible, felt grateful for Camilla's support. He handed over the letter, trusting that it would reach its destination. What William couldn't see was the slight smile that crossed Camilla's lips as her fingers closed around the envelope. Years of navigating royal politics had taught her that information was power, and personal secrets were the most valuable currency of all. She had built her position through careful calculation and strategic thinking, always several steps ahead of those around her. As Camilla left William's study, she didn't head toward the hospital as he expected. Instead, she retreated to her private chambers, where she could examine the letter without interruption. The room was decorated with personal photographs and mementos from her years in royal service, each item carefully chosen to reflect her status and importance within the family hierarchy. She held the envelope up to the light, contemplating its contents. Camilla understood better than most that the monarchy's future depended on public perception and carefully managed narratives. Kate's illness had already generated enormous sympathy for the royal family, but a deeply personal letter from William could create an even more powerful emotional response if it ever became public. The queen consort's mind worked through various scenarios. If Kate recovered, the letter would remain a private matter between husband and wife. But if the worst happened, William's final words to his beloved wife could become legendary, potentially overshadowing everything else about the royal family's legacy. Camilla had spent years working to establish her own place in history, and she wasn't about to let sentiment interfere with her carefully laid plans. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Kate drifted in and out of consciousness, unaware of the drama unfolding around her letter. The medical team continued their efforts, but privately they were preparing William for the inevitable. The prince had been by her bedside for hours, holding her hand and whispering words of love and encouragement, believing that his heartfelt letter would soon bring her comfort. The nurses occasionally asked if he was expecting any deliveries, as they wanted to be sure nothing important was delayed. William kept checking his phone, wondering why the letter was taking so long to arrive. He had specifically asked Camilla to rush it to Kate, emphasizing how crucial it was that she receive it while she was still lucid enough to understand its meaning. As the afternoon wore on, William's anxiety grew. He called the palace several times but was told that Camilla had stepped out for royal duties and couldn't be reached immediately. The excuses seemed reasonable enough, but something felt wrong. William knew Camilla's schedule was usually managed to the minute, and disappearing during a family crisis was unlike her usual protocol-driven behavior. The sun began to set outside Kate's hospital window, casting the room in a golden glow that reminded William of their wedding day. He squeezed her hand tighter, willing her to wake up one more time so he could tell her in person what the letter contained. But Kate remained unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored as the machines around her monitored every vital sign. In the distance, the bells of Westminster began their evening chimes, marking another day in the long history of the British monarchy. William couldn't know that his letter lay hidden in Camilla's private study, its words of love and farewell destined never to reach their intended recipient. The game of royal politics had claimed another casualty, and this time it was the most personal sacrifice of all. Camilla returned to the palace that evening with the satisfied air of someone who had handled a delicate situation with characteristic efficiency. She found William still at the hospital and offered her sympathies, mentioning that the letter had encountered some delay but would surely reach Kate soon. Her performance was flawless, combining just the right amount of concern with bureaucratic explanation that William, in his grief and exhaustion, accepted without question. The night stretched endlessly ahead as William maintained his vigil, unaware that his final gift to Kate would never arrive. The royal machinery continued its relentless operation, grinding forward with tradition and protocol, while personal tragedy played out in the shadows. Camilla had made her choice, prioritizing her own vision of the monarchy's future over a dying woman's right to receive her husband's farewell. As midnight approached, the first part of this tragic tale drew to a close, with William still believing in promises that had already been broken, and Kate slipping further away, without ever knowing how deeply she was loved in those final hours. The early morning hours brought no relief to William as he sat beside Kate's bed, watching her chest rise and fall with mechanical rhythm. The hospital room had become his entire world, a sterile sanctuary where time seemed suspended between hope and despair. He had dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable chair, waking every few minutes to check if anything had changed, if perhaps his letter had finally arrived to offer Kate some comfort in her final hours. Dr. Henderson, the lead physician, entered the room with the solemn expression that had become all too familiar. The medical team had done everything possible, but Kate's condition continued to deteriorate. They spoke in hushed tones about comfort measures and family wishes, the clinical language barely masking the emotional weight of what they were really discussing. William nodded numbly, his mind still occupied with thoughts of the letter that should have reached Kate by now. A gentle knock interrupted their conversation as a palace aide appeared in the doorway. The young man looked nervous as he approached William, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and a brief note from various royal family members. William scanned the messages quickly, looking for any mention of his letter or confirmation that Camilla had delivered it as promised. Finding nothing, he felt a growing unease that he couldn't quite explain. When William called the palace again, he was connected to Camilla's private secretary, a woman whose loyalty to the queen consort was absolute. She explained with practiced smoothness that there had been some confusion about the letter's delivery, and that Camilla was personally handling the matter to ensure it reached the Princess of Wales without delay. The explanation sounded reasonable, but William detected something in the secretary's tone that didn't ring true. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, Camilla stood in her private study holding William's letter. She had read it multiple times during the night, each reading confirming her decision to intercept it. The letter was beautifully written, filled with intimate memories and declarations of love that would have moved anyone who read them. But Camilla saw beyond the romantic sentiment to the potential consequences if such a letter ever became public knowledge. The queen consort understood that Kate's death would create an unprecedented outpouring of public grief. The Princess of Wales had captured hearts around the world with her grace, her dedication to charitable causes, and her genuine warmth with people from all walks of life. William's letter, with its raw emotion and personal revelations, could become a sacred text for mourners, elevating Kate's memory to almost mythical status. Camilla had worked too hard to establish her own legacy to allow it to be overshadowed by a dead woman's love story. She remembered the years of being vilified in the press, the constant comparisons to Diana, and the slow, painful process of winning public acceptance. Kate's death threatened to reignite those old wounds and potentially diminish everything Camilla had accomplished as queen consort. The letter also contained details about the royal family's private dynamics that could prove problematic if they ever became public. William had written honestly about his struggles with royal duty, his fears about raising his children in the spotlight, and his dreams of a more modern monarchy that Kate had helped him envision. These revelations, while beautiful in context, could be twisted by critics or used against the family during vulnerable moments. As morning light filtered through the ornate windows of her study, Camilla made her final decision. She moved to the marble fireplace that dominated one wall of the room, its mantel decorated with photographs from significant royal events. The fireplace was rarely used, serving more as a decorative element than a functional one, but this morning it would serve a very specific purpose. Camilla struck a match with steady hands, watching the small flame dance before applying it to the corner of William's letter. The paper caught quickly, and she held the envelope until the flames threatened her fingers before dropping it into the fireplace. The words of love and farewell that William had crafted so carefully turned to ash within minutes, their sentiment reduced to smoke that disappeared up the chimney. The destruction was complete, but Camilla felt no satisfaction in her actions. She understood that she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, violating the trust of a grieving man and denying a dying woman her husband's final words. Yet she also believed that she was protecting the monarchy from potential chaos and ensuring that her own position remained secure during the difficult transition that lay ahead. Back at the hospital, William's anxiety about the missing letter was growing stronger. He had asked the nursing staff multiple times if any deliveries had arrived, and their negative responses were beginning to feel ominous. When he tried calling Camilla directly, he was told she was in important meetings and couldn't be disturbed. The excuse felt hollow, especially during such a personal crisis. Kate stirred briefly during the late morning hours, her eyes fluttering open with a clarity that had been absent for days. William leaned forward eagerly, hoping this might be the moment when she could read his letter and understand how much she meant to him. Her lips moved softly, and he strained to hear her whispered words about love and gratitude for their life together. The lucid moment passed quickly, and Kate slipped back into unconsciousness, but not before William saw recognition in her eyes. She had known he was there, had felt his presence and his love even without the letter he had written. It was a small comfort, but William couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing from their goodbye. Dr. Henderson returned in the early afternoon with news that everyone had been dreading. Kate's vital signs were failing, and they estimated she had only hours left. William requested privacy for their final time together, and the medical staff respectfully withdrew, leaving him alone with the woman who had been his partner, his confidant, and his greatest love. As the afternoon wore on, William spoke to Kate constantly, telling her stories about their children, their shared memories, and their dreams for the future that would now never come to pass. He recounted every word he could remember from the letter, hoping that somehow she could hear him and understand the depth of his feelings. The machines around them provided a steady rhythm that seemed to mark the passing of precious time. Camilla arrived at the hospital as the sun was setting, her expression appropriately somber as she joined William at Kate's bedside. She offered words of comfort and support, her performance so convincing that William felt genuinely grateful for her presence during this difficult time. When he asked about the letter one final time, Camilla looked him directly in the eyes and explained that it had unfortunately been misplaced in the chaos of the day, but that Kate surely knew how much he loved her. The lie came so naturally that William never suspected the truth. He was too consumed with grief and exhaustion to notice the slight tension in Camilla's voice or the way her eyes didn't quite meet his when she spoke about the letter. In his trusting nature, he accepted her explanation and focused on making Kate's final hours as peaceful as possible. As night fell over the hospital, the end came peacefully. Kate slipped away while William held her hand, her last breath barely disturbing the quiet of the room. The machines fell silent one by one as the medical team officially recorded the time of death. William sat in stunned silence, unable to fully comprehend that his beloved wife was gone forever. Camilla remained by his side during those first terrible moments, offering tissues and gentle words of comfort. She helped coordinate with the medical staff and palace officials who arrived to handle the necessary arrangements. To any observer, she appeared to be the perfect stepmother-in-law, providing crucial support during William's darkest hour. But as William wept over Kate's still form, Camilla couldn't entirely suppress the satisfaction she felt at having successfully managed a potential crisis. The letter that could have complicated her own position was gone forever, its contents known only to her and now impossible to verify or reproduce. She had protected her own interests while maintaining the appearance of caring concern. The second part of this tragic tale concluded with William beginning his journey through grief, unaware that his final gift to Kate had been deliberately destroyed. The royal family would soon face the enormous task of managing public mourning while dealing with their private loss. But for Camilla, the most dangerous threat to her carefully constructed legacy had been eliminated before it could ever see the light of day. The ashes of William's letter had long since cooled in the fireplace at Windsor Castle, but the consequences of Camilla's actions were only beginning to unfold. The truth about the missing farewell would remain buried for now. But secrets in the royal family have a way of eventually coming to light, especially when they involve matters of the heart and betrayals of trust that cut to the very core of human dignity. The weeks following Kate's funeral passed in a blur of official mourning and private grief that seemed to engulf the entire nation. Westminster Abbey had overflowed with mourners from around the world, and the streets of London were lined with flowers, photographs, and heartfelt messages from people who had never met the Princess of Wales but felt they had lost someone dear to them. William moved through the ceremonies and obligations like a man underwater, going through the motions of royal duty while struggling to process his devastating loss. The palace had handled the arrangements with typical efficiency, but William found himself haunted by small details that didn't quite add up. The missing letter continued to trouble him, though grief made it difficult to focus on anything beyond the immediate demands of each day. Camilla had been a constant presence during the funeral preparations, offering guidance and support that William appreciated even as something nagged at the back of his mind. It was during the sorting of Kate's personal belongings that the first crack in Camilla's carefully constructed story began to appear. William had requested privacy to go through Kate's things alone, needing the solitary time to connect with memories of their life together. In Kate's private desk at Kensington Palace, he discovered a collection of letters and notes they had exchanged over the years, carefully preserved in a wooden box that had been a wedding gift. As he read through these precious mementos, William was struck by Kate's habit of keeping every meaningful piece of correspondence. She had saved silly notes he'd left for her during their courtship, formal letters from their engagement period, and even quick messages scribbled on palace stationery during busy royal tours. The realization hit him like a physical blow. If his final letter had reached Kate, she would have kept it with these other treasures. Its absence was glaring proof that something had gone terribly wrong. The discovery sent William into a state of agitated investigation that worried his security team. He questioned every palace aide, every hospital staff member, and anyone else who might have handled communications during Kate's final days. Most had no knowledge of any letter, but a few remembered seeing him give something to Camilla with urgent instructions for delivery. Their recollections were vague but consistent enough to confirm what William was beginning to suspect. When William confronted Camilla directly, she initially maintained her story about the letter being misplaced in the chaos of Kate's illness. But as his questions became more specific and persistent, small inconsistencies began to emerge in her explanations. She couldn't account for specific timing, couldn't name which staff member had supposedly handled the delivery, and seemed uncomfortable with the intensity of William's scrutiny. The truth might have remained buried if not for Margaret Thornfield, Camilla's long-serving personal maid, whose loyalty was finally tested beyond its limits. Margaret had witnessed Camilla burning the letter in the fireplace, and the image had haunted her conscience ever since Kate's funeral. The elderly woman had served the royal family for over 30 years, and she understood the sacred nature of a husband's final words to his dying wife. Margaret's decision to speak up came during one of William's increasingly desperate searches through palace records. She found him in Camilla's study, examining the fireplace where the letter had been destroyed, though he didn't yet understand its significance. The maid's hands shook as she told him what she had witnessed, her voice barely above a whisper as she described watching the letter turn to ash. The revelation hit William with the force of a physical blow. The woman he had trusted to deliver his most precious gift to Kate had deliberately destroyed it, denying both of them their final moment of connection. The betrayal was so profound that William struggled to process its implications. Camilla hadn't just misplaced a letter, she had actively prevented a dying woman from receiving her husband's farewell. William's confrontation with Camilla was explosive and private, conducted behind closed doors in the same study where the letter had been burned. Camilla initially attempted to deny Margaret's account, but faced with William's fury and the maid's detailed testimony, she eventually admitted to destroying the letter. Her justification was cold and calculated. She claimed she had acted to protect the monarchy from potential embarrassment if the letter's personal contents ever became public. The explanation only deepened William's rage. He couldn't comprehend how anyone could view his love for Kate as a threat to the royal family's reputation. The letter had contained nothing scandalous or inappropriate, only the honest emotions of a husband facing the loss of his beloved wife. Camilla's paranoia about public perception had led her to commit an act that William saw as unconscionably cruel. The aftermath of this revelation sent shockwaves through the palace hierarchy, though the conflict was carefully kept from public view. William demanded Camilla's immediate removal from her position, but King Charles found himself caught between his wife and his son in an impossible situation. The king's own grief over Kate's death was complicated by his horror at discovering what Camilla had done, yet his loyalty to his wife created a crisis that threatened to tear the royal family apart. Palace staff who had witnessed the heated exchanges between William and Camilla began choosing sides, creating factions within the household that made normal operations nearly impossible. Some supported William's outrage and called for consequences for Camilla's actions, while others worried about the stability of the monarchy if such internal conflicts became public knowledge. The tension was palpable in every royal residence, affecting everyone from senior courtiers to kitchen staff. The king attempted to broker a reconciliation between William and Camilla, suggesting that grief had affected everyone's judgment and that forgiveness was essential for the family's future. But William remained unmoved by these appeals, viewing the destruction of his letter as an unforgivable violation of his marriage to Kate and her memory. He couldn't look at Camilla without seeing the woman who had stolen his final gift to the love of his life. Media speculation about tensions within the royal family began to surface. Though journalists couldn't access the specific details of the letter incident, royal correspondents noted William's increased isolation from family events and Camilla's notably reduced public profile following Kate's death. The palace's usual stream of coordinated appearances and statements had dried up, replaced by carefully managed separate schedules that kept William and Camilla from appearing together. Margaret Thornfield, the maid whose conscience had exposed the truth, found herself in an impossible position between her loyalty to the royal family and her moral conviction that William deserved to know what had happened to his letter. The palace attempted to transfer her to a remote location, officially for her own protection. But William intervened to ensure she could retire with full honors and a pension that recognized her years of faithful service and final act of courage. The public remained unaware of the specific details, but the aftermath of the letter incident fundamentally changed the dynamics within the royal family. William's relationship with his father became strained as Charles struggled to balance his roles as king, husband, and father in the wake of Camilla's actions. The prince began operating more independently, making decisions about his public duties and charitable work without the consultation that had previously characterized royal family coordination. Camilla's position as queen consort remained technically unchanged, but her influence within the palace diminished significantly. Staff members became reluctant to trust her with sensitive information, and her attempts to manage royal family affairs were met with polite resistance. She had achieved her goal of eliminating what she saw as a threat to her legacy, but the cost was her relationship with the future king and her standing within the institution she had worked so hard to join. The burned letter became a symbol of something larger for William, the way royal protocol and political calculation could override basic human decency. His grief for Kate was complicated by rage at being denied the chance to offer her comfort in her final hours, and by the knowledge that she had died without knowing the full depth of his love as expressed in that final message. As months passed and the immediate crisis of Kate's death receded into a more manageable grief, William began to channel his anger into a determination to prevent such betrayals from occurring again. He started making plans for how he would operate when he eventually became king, with a focus on transparency and genuine human connection that would honor Kate's memory and ensure that personal politics could never again interfere with matters of love and family. The third and final part of this tragic tale concluded with a royal family forever changed by one woman's decision to prioritize political considerations over human compassion. The letter that should have been Kate's final comfort had been reduced to ashes, but its destruction had revealed truths about power, loyalty, and betrayal that would influence the monarchy's future for generations to come. William carried the weight of this knowledge forward, forever changed by the understanding that even in the most sacred moments of life and death, the machinery of royal politics continued to operate. His love for Kate had survived her death, but his trust in the institution that had shaped his entire life had been fundamentally shattered by the woman who had chosen protocol over mercy in the darkest hour of their lives.